In the heart of Mexico, with fans chanting his name and the entire nation rooting for him, Sergio Perez set out to turn the Mexican Grand Prix into a memorable triumph. But instead of a fairy tale victory, the event unraveled into a gripping drama filled with twists and setbacks. From the very start, an early penalty saw Perez drop to the back of the grid, leaving him fighting an uphill battle. But that was just the beginning. Things took a darker turn when Perez came dangerously close to colliding with Lawson, the fiery newcomer aiming to make his mark and, possibly, take Perez's very seat at Red Bull. Now let's get one thing clear: Lawson isn't just another rookie fumbling through the ranks. This young talent is here to stay, and if Perez keeps stumbling, Lawson could snatch that coveted Red Bull spot right out from under him. So what exactly happened on the track that led to such a fierce encounter between these two? And what's more, how did the tension carry on well beyond the finish line, hinting at a storm brewing within Red Bull's camp? With many already questioning whether Perez still fits within Red Bull's ambitious plans, this incident couldn't have come at a worse time. For a team known for aiming at championships, not survival, Perez's ongoing struggles have been hard to ignore. As the clock ticks down on this season, it seems that Red Bull's dream campaign is starting to crumble. Even Max Verstappen's usually unstoppable dominance is showing signs of cracks. So the question remains: after Perez's chaotic race in Mexico, could this be the end of the road for him at Red Bull? As the race got underway, Perez found himself locked in a fierce battle with none other than Lawson, the young hotshot with ambitions of his own. In the early laps, Perez launched an aggressive move to grab 10th place, momentarily edging past Lawson through the opening sequence of corners. But Lawson wasn't about to let the veteran driver walk away that easily. As the Red Bull driver fought to maintain his lead, Lawson retaliated with a bold maneuver, leading to minor contact enough to leave Perez's car with damage to the side pod and floor. The consequences of this collision were immediate and harsh. Perez's car lost significant performance, forcing him to drag his wounded machine through the rest of the race. What could have been a solid points finish for Perez turned into a nightmare, with him slipping all the way down to 17th place. Ironically, Lawson didn't fare much better, crossing the line just ahead of Perez after later getting tangled up in a clash with Williams driver Franco Capino. Emotions were running high on both ends. Over the team radio, Lawson vented his frustration, going so far as to flip a middle finger at Perez while passing him a gesture that was as impulsive as it was telling. Meanwhile, Perez's frustration was also palpable. The veteran voiced his displeasure, warning that Lawson's recent clashes, especially his run-in with Fernando Alonso during the Austin Grand Prix, revealed a concerning pattern. According to Perez, these incidents weren't just racing mishaps, they were signs of Lawson's lack of maturity and caution on the track. He argued that Lawson could have easily avoided the collision had he shown more restraint. "The damage didn't just ruin my race, it hurt both of us," Perez lamented post-race, calling Lawson's actions excessive and unnecessary. The Mexican driver didn't hold back when asked about his personal rapport with Lawson. There is no relationship, Perez admitted bluntly. He suggested that Lawson's attitude, particularly the lack of respect toward more experienced drivers, might become a hurdle in his career. "Talent can only get you so far," Perez remarked. "Without humility, it's hard to last in this sport." Perez didn't just stop at venting his frustration publicly, he made sure to send a message to Red Bull's leadership. He urged the team management to take a closer look at Lawson's behavior, suggesting that such reckless actions were costing the team valuable points. However, Red Bull's principal, Christian Horner, seemed to brush off the matter, emphasizing that both drivers were racing independently. "Hard racing is part of the sport," Horner remarked, implying that incidents like these are to be expected, even within the same camp. This response, or lack thereof, only added fuel to the tension. It was becoming clear that Perez's concerns didn't resonate deeply with the team hierarchy, signaling that his grip on his Red Bull seat could be slipping. The stakes couldn't be higher, with rumors swirling that Lawson is being seriously considered as a long-term replacement for Perez. Meanwhile, Perez tried to downplay the internal competition, maintaining that it was ultimately Red Bull's call whether to have a conversation with Lawson about his on-track behavior. Lawson, on the other hand, showed a mix of defiance and regret. While he echoed some of Perez's sentiments about their clash, he also admitted that his emotional outburst, a middle finger directed at the senior driver, was out of character. "That was a heat-of-the-moment reaction," Lawson said, acknowledging that it wasn't the best reflection of his professionalism. He knew Red Bull advisor Helmut Marko wouldn't take kindly to such gestures, and Lawson promised to work on maintaining his composure in the heat of battle. Despite the apology, the tension between the two drivers lingered. Lawson stood by his stance, arguing that Perez was equally to blame for their collision during lap 18. However, external commentators seemed to take a different view. Sky Sports' Martin Brundle pointed out that Lawson's driving appeared questionable, noting that he had barely left enough space for Perez during the incident. According to Brundle, the contact was more Lawson's fault, placing the blame at about 60 to 40% in Perez's favor. Even though the stewards opted not to impose penalties, the general consensus was that the encounter was messy and unnecessary, especially given the challenging nature of the corner involved. As rumors spread about a potential shakeup in Red Bull's 2025 driver lineup, tensions within the team became impossible to ignore. Would Lawson's growing presence be enough to force Perez out? Or could Daniel Ricciardo make a surprise comeback and reclaim his spot at Red Bull? This uncertainty was casting a shadow over the entire team, making every race more critical for Perez to prove his worth. Even Christian Horner's comments hinted at a looming decision. "It's a performance-based business," Horner said in an interview. "At some point, tough calls have to be made." This admission sent ripples through the paddock, as it became clear that Red Bull wasn't ruling out significant changes. The question was, would Perez survive the season, or was it already too late to save his seat? Despite all the pressure, Perez remained surprisingly calm. Speaking to the media, he dismissed the speculation about his future. "I have no doubts. I'll be on the grid next year, and I'm aiming for wins," he declared confidently. His resilience was admirable after all. Perez had weathered many storms during his career, outlasting some of Red Bull's top engineers and staff. Yet, with Lawson breathing down his neck, it was clear that the fight for his place was far from over. Meanwhile, Perez's struggles weren't the only problem Red Bull faced. Even Max Verstappen had a tough outing in Mexico, plagued by penalties and performance issues that derailed his race. Verstappen found himself caught up in two separate incidents, with McLaren's Lando Norris, one at Turn 4, where he was penalized for forcing Norris off the track, and another at Turn 8, where he re-entered the circuit ahead of Norris after going wide, earning him yet another penalty. This time, it was Verstappen who felt the sting of stricter officiating, a situation made more ironic by the fact that Norris had faced similar penalties in Austin just a week earlier. For Verstappen, though, the real frustration wasn't with the race officials, it was with the car itself. He admitted that Red Bull's performance had been disappointing on both medium and hard tires, leaving him unable to compete with the frontrunners. By the end of the race, Verstappen crossed the line in a disappointing 6th place, unable to challenge the Mercedes drivers ahead of him. The RB20's lack of grip and weak braking performance left Verstappen feeling frustrated and powerless throughout the event. Despite these setbacks, the Dutch driver remained cautiously optimistic about the upcoming Brazilian Grand Prix. "It's all about learning and adapting," Verstappen commented, acknowledging that the car's limitations were evident throughout the weekend. He emphasized that bouncing back would require adjustments both on and off the track, signaling that Red Bull was already preparing to tweak their strategy for the next race. Meanwhile, Lando Norris quietly chipped away at the points gap in the Drivers' Championship. With just 4 races remaining in the season, the gap between Norris and Verstappen had shrunk to 47 points, heightening the tension as the season approached its climax. If Verstappen falters again in Brazil, the fallout could trigger significant changes within Red Bull's structure, sending shockwaves through the paddock. Behind the scenes, the question of Red Bull's 2025 driver lineup loomed larger than ever. Speculation grew about whether Lawson would get the nod to replace Perez, or if Daniel Ricciardo might stage an unexpected return. Every decision carried weight, and with Horner hinting that changes were on the table, no one could afford to get too comfortable. As Red Bull prepared for Brazil, the internal battle between Perez and Lawson remained unresolved. Fans and analysts alike speculated about who would partner Verstappen next season and whether Perez's confidence would be enough to keep his seat. Even the usually composed Perez had to admit that the pressure was mounting, but he refused to show signs of weakness. For now, all eyes are on Red Bull as they head to Brazil. The focus isn't just on whether Verstappen can reclaim his dominant form, but also on how the growing tension between Perez and Lawson will play out. The Brazilian Grand Prix Rex promises to be a decisive moment not only for Perez's future but for the entire team's direction heading into 2025. As the paddock shifts its attention to the upcoming Brazilian Grand Prix, the stakes have never been higher for both Sergio Perez and Red Bull Racing. While Verstappen aims to shake off his recent struggles, the underlying tension within the team continues to simmer. Will Perez rise to the occasion, silencing critics and proving he still belongs? Or will Lawson seize his chance, forcing Red Bull to make a difficult decision about their 2025 lineup? Lawson, on the other hand, knows he has everything to gain. With each passing race, the young driver inches closer to securing a permanent seat at Red Bull. His clashes with veteran drivers may have raised eyebrows, but they've also demonstrated his willingness to fight for his place. Whether that tenacity will earn him praise or punishment remains to be seen, but Lawson is determined to keep pushing forward. Meanwhile, Verstappen will need more than just strategy adjustments to reclaim his usual dominance. The RB20's performance issues in Mexico revealed vulnerabilities that Red Bull will have to address quickly if they want to stay ahead of their rivals. With Lando Norris closing the gap in the standings, any further slip-ups could spell disaster for Verstappen's championship hopes and shake Red Bull to its core. The Brazilian Grand Prix Rix now looms as a critical juncture for everyone involved. Fans are eager to see if Verstappen can bounce back, but the real drama lies off the track. Will Red Bull bet on youth and promote Lawson? Or will Perez find a way to redeem himself and keep his seat against all odds? The countdown has begun, and one thing is certain: no one can afford to back down. The stage is set for a thrilling showdown in Brazil, where every corner, every lap, and every decision could alter the course of the season and the team's future. Whether you're rooting for Perez, Lawson, or Verstappen, one thing is guaranteed: the drama at Red Bull Racing is far from over.